You are about to experience the Life Science Effect Solo Edition. Hi everybody, Steve here. We are in the middle of summer break, in case you didn't notice. Shows haven't been showing up in your feed. We're going to change that here over the next few weeks. We are in the middle of summer break, as we were last year about this time. With everything that goes on in the summer, it's harder to get guests scheduled. Not to mention, I'm in the middle of a big project right now. Because it's summer, we get some line time on the manufacturing line, and I'm managing a $5 million project to put in some new packaging equipment. And so I don't have as much time, but I do have time to talk to you over the next few weeks. We'll get guests going again late summer, early fall, once my project sort of eases up a little bit, and once everybody starts getting back from vacation, we'll start getting those guests back in here. Meanwhile, I'm going to put out solo episodes once a week, talking about topics we all care about, maybe even mentioning some of my guests, maybe reminiscing about some of the best interviews we've had, and maybe talking about some of the future guests as we get those lined up. That having been said, this week I've been interested lately in what it takes to make the leap from whatever you're doing today, whether it be academia or corporate work or whatever you happen to be doing, into a startup entrepreneurial sort of situation, whether it's biotech, pharma, medical device. You'll hear me talking about this over the next few weeks because it's something I'm interested in. A lot of my clients, as you know, are large corporate clients, and I really love doing work and making a difference that way. I'm interested in maybe trying out the startup space, trying out the more entrepreneurial companies and the more innovative companies, in part because I've been talking to a lot of people like that lately as part of this podcast, and it's really exciting, and there are people out there making it happen every day. So enjoying the corporate work I do, wouldn't mind trying out the startup world. So I've started reading a bit about people who have made those kind of leaps. This first one this week, I want to talk about a guy by the name of Graham Kelly, who is the CEO of Noxopharm, a company I hadn't really heard of until I read this. I read it in the Life Science Leader, and I'll put the link to this article in the show notes. But he came out of academia. He was a researcher at the University of Sydney, and he had some success there, but he was thinking about how he could have a bigger impact. And he had this idea, this hypothesis for how he could apply some of what he was studying in the academic world in a more commercial setting, in a more startup entrepreneurial setting, but he had no idea what to do or how to do it or whatever. And so he figured it out. He became a CEO at a startup, and then was so successful he started several other companies up and then sold those companies. So he talks about in this article, he wrote this article for the Life Science Leader, and he talks about sort of the keys to success for making that transition. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about those today. The first one that he talks about is taking advantage of your inner circle. And this one comes up over and over. I don't care what self-help book you read or what podcast you listen to. It's always important to depend on your contacts and to not be afraid to talk about what it is you want to do, and let people help you. So he happened to be talking to his neighbor at the time, talking about, so his neighbor is, I don't know if it's a backyard barbecue or something, and the dreaded question of, so what do you do? And his neighbor asked him that, and he said, he's a medical researcher, and he talked about this anti-cancer drug development idea that he had, and that he was having trouble getting funding to actually test his theory in the world of academia. And the neighbor happened to be a stockbroker. And he says, well, have you ever thought about, raising money and starting a public company? And so Graham Kelly's like, no, I'm an academic researcher. You're a stockbroker. Of course I never thought about that. And so the guy, sort of talked more about it and told him how it might work. And so they partnered up, and in 9 months they raised $7.5 million. and listed the company on the stock market. This is back in the mid-90s. And so, the lesson for him was just by simply talking to somebody who he knew about what he wanted to do and just sharing his ideas, he was able to actually make this thing happen. So step one, talk about what you want to do. Next thing he talks about is something we don't often hear about, at least in the corporate world. I don't know about the academic world, but personalizing your story, making it something personal so that it can resonate with people. Just being very academic or very technical about describing your theory or your hypothesis or your innovations, not really going to connect with people as much as really making it personal. In his case, he had this idea of how to improve anti-cancer drug development, getting these life-saving medicines to patients quicker, or maybe discovering more innovative things. But he was frustrated because he didn't know where to get the money or how to get the money to test his hypothesis because, it's academia and maybe there's not as much money available. So when he was able to personalize this story to his neighbor, it really helped him a lot. Okay, so then you figure out, you find the people who are going to help you. He becomes the CEO of this company, and he walks in on his first day, having been a medical researcher for years. Now he's a CEO. He looks around the room and he's like, okay, now what? So he said that's one of his next bits of advice is embrace the what do I do now moment. He says that CEOs that come out of academia, rarely do they have as he puts it, quote, a degree in accounting, a financial services license, a course in human resources, an MBA, and a diploma in being a boardroom director, end quote. And what he's basically saying there is he's been a medical researcher. He doesn't have all those skills. And I can relate to that. I'm a project manager and a chemical engineer. I don't have an MBA. I don't have an accounting degree. I don't have a financial services license. I know how to manage teams, but I wouldn't be able to put a balance sheet together for a multi-million-dollar company. And what his point is, first of all, if you've personalized your story and you have a compelling story to your investors, they're going to give you a little bit of a honeymoon period. They realize you're not an experienced CEO. If you're coming out of academia, let's say, they know that you're a kid with a dream, right? And they're going to give you a little bit of a honeymoon period. But then, so take a little time to enjoy it, bask in the glory, he says. But then realize that you have people around you. You don't stop relying on your inner circle just because you got your money and you became a CEO. Get people around you that complement, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and surround yourself with people who can fill in those gaps and trust those people. So then the next thing he talks about is making sure that when you're the CEO that you know that it's not any longer just about the big idea and the shiny object that you can go chasing around. You have to know when something's worth investing time and money into and when you just need to let it go. I know when novelists talk about this, they talk about being willing to kill your children. And basically the children they're talking about are these ideas or these characters that you have that you're writing into your novel. Don't get to the point where you're unwilling to let one go if it doesn't add to the story. Maybe the only reason you have it in there is because you think it's interesting. So he's saying it's the same with ideas and with technologies and things. Let your scientists maybe chase those ideas, but as a CEO, if you don't see the value, don't let it suck up all your time. And then finally, his last bit of advice here is personal relationships and personal relations, which is, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's one of the things that I consider a strength of mine. But he has several items here that he's recommending that you focus on. One is decision making. Again, relying on your inner circle, realizing that you don't know everything and that you don't have all the answers. However, ultimately, you do need to be able to talk to people and take their input and listen to their insights. And then ultimately you have to be able to make a decision out of that. So it's not like, okay, you have to make the decision. You don't have to make the decision in a vacuum, though. The second area he talks about is encouraging ideas from everyone and not shooting down people's ideas. Encourage your scientists and people around you to take risks and think creatively, and don't punish them for coming to you with ideas that you think are maybe wacky or weird. Encourage that sort of behavior so that you can get all the input that you're going to need. And finally, his last bit of advice, which I don't know anything about having investors really, but I'm all about open communication. And he said, being open with your investors, because they've given you a ton of money. And he's saying the least you can do is to make sure they know what you're doing with their money. So transparency. So that's Graham Kelly. Again, I'll put the link to the article and you can go read it. But my thoughts are that those are really good bits of advice, and probably not just for the biotech industry. Probably like any industry that you're going to go out and lead people and spend other people's money to try to be innovative. That's probably all really good advice. So thanks for listening to me think about this. If you have any thoughts, give me an email, steven.vinson@bpm-associates.com. If you have any thoughts on becoming a biotech entrepreneur, tell us your horror stories. And like I said, I'm going to keep talking about this over the next few weeks. I've got a few other articles that I've been looking at. So we'll be talking about that as well. And looking forward to late summer, early fall, getting back to having some guests. As always, thanks for listening.